Hello students. In my previous lecture, I have explained you hypothesis, and in this lecture, I am going to explain you about another very important step of psychological research, and that is variables. In this lecture, I am going to explain you the basic concept of variables, their types, and their controlling techniques. Variables are properties or characteristics of some event, object, person, place, or thing that are measurable and can take on more than one value or vary. In other words, variables are the conditions that are manipulated, controlled, or observed by the experimenter. So on the basis of this definition, we can say that variable is something that can be varied, that can be manipulated, that can be increased or decreased by the experimenter. So variables are all the things which are manipulable, which can be varied by the experimenter. So these are the conditions of any concept that can be manipulated, controlled, or observed by the experimenter. So variable can be classified as independent variable, dependent variable, extraneous variable, etc. And the term independent variable and dependent variable are borrowed from the field of mathematics in behavioral researches. The classification of variables into independent variable and dependent variable is frequently employed in experimental research. Underwood calls the independent variable as the stimulus variable and dependent variable as the response variables. So these are some important types of variable, for example, IV, DV, and EV. And these terms are basically borrowed from maths. So on the basis of all these things, I'm going to further explain the basic concept of IV and DV. So independent variable is that variable that is stable and unaffected by the other variables you are trying to measure. It refers to the condition of an experiment that is systematically manipulated by the experimenter. It is presumed cause. So independent variable is that variable which is manipulated by the experimenter. For example, in an experiment, if we want to see the effect of anxiety upon performance, or if we want to see the relationship of anxiety and performance, so in this case, we are going to manipulate anxiety. So anxiety would be the independent variable, and we want to see the effect of this anxiety upon performance. So performance would be the dependent variable. So independent variable is that variable which is manipulated by the experimenter in different levels. So an independent variable is also sometimes called a controlled variable, an explanatory variable, an exposure variable, in reliability theory, a feature in machine learning and pattern recognition, an input variable, a manipulated variable, a predictor variable, a regressor in regression analysis, a risk factor in medical statistics, and a change variable. So these are all synonyms of independent variable, and these are used in context of different fields. For example, if we are involved in medical statistics, independent variable would be called a risk factors. If we are conducting a regression analysis, independent variable would be known as regressor. So it all depends upon what type of research and what type of statistics we are going to perform. So these are some possible synonyms of independent variable. This is the major classification of independent variable on the basis of type E and type S variable. So type E variables, type E independent variables are those variables which are directly or experimentally manipulated by the experimenter. And type S variables are those variables which are manipulated only through the process of selection. Here, I would like to differentiate between type E and type S variable on the basis of an example. Supposing an experimenter wants to see the effect of anxiety upon performance, here anxiety would be directly manipulated by the experimenter. For example, he would take three types of individual ranging from high anxiety to low anxiety, and he will very easily would be able to see the effect of different levels of anxiety upon performance. But as far as type S variables are concerned, they are very difficult to manipulate. In the same condition, supposing we want to see the effect of age upon anxiety. So here age would be manipulated only through the process of selection. For example, we would take different groups of age, supposing ranging from 16 years to 55 years. And then we would like to see the effect of age upon anxiety and then their effect upon performance. So here age is the factor which is manipulated only through the process of selection. So these type of independent variable are known as type S variable, which are not directly manipulated by the experimenter, but which can only be manipulated through the process of selection only. So the researches which are done on the basis of type E variable are known as experimentation, and the researcher which are based upon type S variable are known as correlational researches. Now, second classification of variable is on the nature of variable. This is task variables, environmental variables, and subject variables. Task variables refers to those characteristics which are related with the behavioral task presented to the subject. Physical characteristics of apparatus as well as many features of the task procedure come under the category of task variables. For example, if you are dealing with memory drum, so all the characteristics of memory drum would come under the category of task variables. Environmental variables, these are the characteristics of the environment which are not the physical part of the task as such, but tend to produce changes in the behavioral measure. Noise, temperature, light, etc. are example of environmental variables. And third is subject variable. Characteristics of the subject which are likely to produce changes in the behavioral measures such as sex, age, weight, anxiety, IQ, etc. are some of them. So subject independent variables are also very important to affect the dependent variable of the independent. Now, dependent variable. The variable that depends on other factors that are measured. These variables are expected to change as a result of an experimental manipulation of the independent variable or variables, and it is the presumed effect. Independent variables are known as presumed cause, and dependent variables are known as the presumed effect. And these variables are observable behavior. These variables are those variables which are observed by the experimenter. These are those variables upon which the experimenter wants to see the manipulation of independent variables. So independent variables are known as the response variable as well. So cause, that is independent variable, and these are manipulated, and effect, these are measured. So we manipulate independent variable and we see the effect of these manipulations upon dependent variable, that is measured. So manipulations is the characteristics of individual independent variable, while measurement is the characteristic of dependent variable. Now we come to the third category of variables, that is extraneous variables. These are all variables which are not the independent variable but could affect the result of the experiment. Hence, all the other variables that could affect the dependent variable to change must be controlled. These other variables are called extraneous or confounding variables. So these extraneous variables are also very important because they can inflate or they can fluctuate the dependent variable. And if these extraneous variables are not controlled, we cannot say whether the change in dependent variable is because of the independent variable or because of some extraneous variables which are not being controlled. For example, if we want to see the effect of nutrition upon physical development, here, here socioeconomic status would serve as the extraneous variable. So extraneous variables, if not controlled, can affect positively or negatively to the dependent variable. So here, through this pictorial representation, we can also clarify this. Independent variable, we want to know if the independent variable affects the dependent variable in some way. So we want to see the effect of this IV upon PV, but extraneous variable, unfortunately, an extraneous variable that we are not interested in might also affect the dependent variable in some way. So all the other unwanted variable which the experimenter is not interested to measure, if all those variables are affecting the DV, this is known, all those variables are known as the extraneous variables. So variables classified on the basis of unit of measurement. First is quantitative variables. These are those variables whose values result from counting or measuring something. For example, height, weight, time in 100-yard dash, number of items sold to a shopper. So all those things which are countable are known as quantitative variables. Second is qualitative variables, variables that are not measurement variables. Their values do not result from measuring or counting. For example, hair color, religion, political party, and professional. Means all those variables which are known by their qualities or their characteristics are known as the qualitative variables. These variables could not be countable or could not be measured in quantity. So here, this is the differentiation of quantitative and qualitative variable. As we can define quantitative variable as take on numerical value, while qualitative variables take on name or labels. And examples of quantitative variables are number of students in a class, number of square feet in a house, population size of a city, age of an individual, height of an individual. While examples of qualitative variables are eye color, gender, breed of dog, level of education, marital status. So in this way, we can differentiate between quantitative and qualitative variables. Now, quantitative variables can be further subclassified into two ways, that is discrete variable and continuous variable. Discrete variables are countable in a finite amount of time. For example, you can count the change in your pocket. You can count the money in your bank account. You could also count the amount of money in everyone's bank account. It might take you a long time to count that last item, but the point is it is still countable. So discrete variables are always countable in a finite amount of time, while continuous variables would literally take forever to count. In fact, you would get to forever and never finish counting them. For example, take age. You cannot count age. Why not? Because it would literally take forever. So this is the basic difference between discrete variable and continuous variable. And third type of variables are intervening variables. It refers to abstract processes that are not directly observable, but that link the independent and dependent variables in language, learning, and teaching. They are usually inside the subject's heads, including various language learning processes which the researchers cannot observe. For example, if the use of a particular teaching technique is the independent variable and mastery of the objective is the dependent variable, then the language learning process used by the subject are the intervening variables. So intervening variables are those variables which implies in the head of the subject and you cannot directly observe that. So these intervening variables can also affect the dependent variable. Second is the moderator variable. It affects the relationship between the independent and dependent variable, but by modifying the effect of the intervening variables. So unlike extraneous variables, moderator variables are measured and taken into consideration because they are also known as secondary independent variables. So if we want to see the effect of different type of teaching methods upon learning, then level of intelligence would be served as moderator variable. Because supposing you have taken two groups, one group is taught by lecture method and the another group is taught by the demonstration method. So two groups are given taught by two different types of method, but here level of intelligence would affect our dependent variable, because the person who is very intelligent would learn faster even in lecture method also. So here, if we want to see the effect of only teaching method, that which type of teaching method is more effective, we would have to control this moderator variable, that is level of intelligence. For this, we have to either match level of intelligence for all the students, or we have to take the different age, different groups having different level of IQ. So these moderator variables, that is why they are known as the secondary independent variable, because they moderate the relationship between independent and dependent variables. Next variables are active variable and attribute variables. An active variable is a variable that can be manipulated, while an attribute variable is a variable that cannot be manipulated. An example of an attribute variable is gender, race, psychological conditions, and or any characteristic that is inherent or pre-programmed and cannot be altered. So the example of active variable can be anxiety, can be anxiety or motivation, level of motivation. These variables can be manipulated, while gender cannot be manipulated. If you are a female, you are a female, that cannot be manipulated. If you are Hindu, you are Hindu. If you are Brahman, you are Brahman. So attribute variables cannot be manipulated, while active variables can be manipulated by the experimenter. So extraneous variables are all variables which are not the independent variables. Here I want to summarize the whole process. So independent variable, dependent variable, and extraneous variable. In between comes many other variables also. For example, intervening variables and moderator variables, which are type of secondary variables, then active variable and attribute variables. And now concluding, I want to explain more about extraneous variables, because these are all variables which are not the independent variables but could affect the result of the experiment. The researcher want to make sure that it is the manipulation of the IV that has an effect on the dependent variable, not because of some extraneous factors or some uncontrolled factors that are affecting our dependent variables. Then comes the lurking variables. A variable that is neither the explanatory variable nor the response variable. Means that is neither the IV nor the DV, but has a relationship with the response and the explanatory variable. Lurking variables are neither the IV nor the DV, but it may have a relationship with IV and DV both. It is not considered in the study, but could influence the relationship between the variables in the study. For example, if you want to see the effect of, supposing effect of nutrition upon development of a child, here socioeconomic status of a child could serve as a lurking variable. Then confounding variable, a variable that is in the study and is related to the other study variable, thus having an effect on the relationship between these variables. A lurking variable, if included in the study, could have a confounding effect and then be classified as a confounding variable. Now, extraneous variables could also be classified in different type of categories: subject relevant, situational relevant, demand characteristics, and sequence relevant extraneous variables. Now I am coming to the first extraneous variable, subject or person relevant variable. This refers to the ways in which each participant varies from the other and how this could affect the result. For example, mood, intelligence, anxiety, nerves, and concentration, etc. For example, if a participant that has performed a memory test was tired, dyslexic, or had poor eyesight, this could affect their performance and the result of the experiment. So all the characteristics related to the personality of the individual and related to the mood of the individual come under the category of person relevant variable. Second is situation relevant variable. These are aspects of the environment that might affect the participant behavior. For example, noise, temperature, lighting condition. Means all the characteristics of the situation, all those things that are happening in the environment comes under the category of situation related variable. For example, if I am studying something and suddenly some high noise comes. So this high noise can distract the concentration of the subject, and that could positively or negatively affect our dependent variable. So all the characteristics of the environment which can affect DV positively or negatively comes under the category of situation related variables. Third is sequence variables. These are also include order effects that can be controlled using counterbalancing, such as giving half the participant condition A first, while the other half get condition B first. It prevents improvement due to practice or poor performance due to boredom. So by changing the sequence, we can control the sequence variables. And the last classification of extraneous variable is demand characteristics. And these are all the clues in an experiment which convey to the participant the purpose of the research. Demand characteristic can change the result of an experiment if participants change their behavior to conform to expectation. So these demand characteristics are what? These convey the basic purpose of the researcher to the subject, and if a subject comes to know the basic purpose of the experimenter, he can change his opinion, he can change his responses, and he can give the fake responses according to the expectation of the researcher. So this demand characteristic definitely going to affect dependent variable positively or negatively. So participant will be affected by their surroundings, the researcher's characteristics, the researcher's behavior, and their interpretation of what is going on in this situation. Experimenters should attempt to minimize these factors. So these demand characteristics are very important, and if these extraneous factors are not controlled, they are going to, going to definitely affect the dependent variable. Now comes the techniques of controlling extraneous variable, and these techniques I will discuss in my next lecture. But I would like to mention these techniques of controlling extraneous variables, and these are technique of elimination, constancy of conditions, balancing, counterbalancing, and randomization. So these are 5 possible techniques of controlling extraneous variable, and these I'm going to discuss in my next lecture. And I hope the concept of variable and the types of variables are clear to you. Thank you for now. Goodbye.